This is it. This is my top game for 2019. I've got something of a streak going now. This is the third time I've asked myself whether I'm going to make this type of video or not. And I figure since it's not only the end of 2019, but the end of the decade, I may as well keep my streak going. Real quick, rather than a top 10, this is actually a top 9 with one very honorable mention. I told myself that I wasn't going to do any ports since last year's list was sort of heavy on them, but there's one game I definitely don't want to ignore. And in a normal year, it would actually belong much higher on the list, but this is the only way I could think of to honor that game while still keeping it separate from all the other games that came out this year and are, as of now, still exclusive to the Switch.
Here's a real high class. Hey, go.
Since Cuphead's release in 2017, I wish that I could play it on a Switch rather than on my PC. I don't own an Xbox, but I figured that this would never actually happen because Microsoft owns the IP. Not sure what I can say about it that hasn't already been said, but it probably deserves every bit of praise it's gotten over the past 2 years. Aside from its gameplay, which is challenging but rewarding, as a general piece of visual media or art form, you could praise the fact that every frame was hand-drawn with ink and paper, every background a watercolor painting, every 3D object a physical model, photographed hundreds of times. Not only was this small indie studio willing to animate 6,000 individual drops of rain for one phase of one boss fight, the creators also had to remortgage their homes to fund and finish the game. So to me, Cuphead is more than just the game itself. It represents a success story of a couple of brothers who believed so strongly in their vision that the end product is uncompromising and refined beyond that which any AAA studio could hope to achieve. I grew up playing many of the run-and-gun games that inspired Cuphead, such as Metal Slug and Gunstar Heroes, and I have to say that Cuphead puts most of them to shame. And somehow I managed to get this far without mentioning the Benny Goodman-inspired soundtrack, which is honestly Kino. In short, I am a huge fan of the game, can't recommend it enough. I can't think of anything more 2019 than taking something like Tetris and turning it into a battle royale type online multiplayer game. The idea is that you play simultaneously with 98 other players to be the last one standing. You can select individuals or groups of individuals to send your garbage blocks to. I'm sure there is a certain point, a certain skill level that you could reach where you would be winning consistently. But my biggest problem with Tetris 99 and games like this is just how luck-based they often feel. I've seen people win by doing no hard drops whatsoever. Meanwhile, I often have games where I feel like I'm playing the best game of Tetris of my life, and as luck would have it, a lot of individuals target me, and it all amounts to jack shit in the end. So if you're playing Tetris 99 to win, you're probably doing it wrong because you're going to lose a lot more than you're going to win, and at the end of the day, it's all about playing Tetris. It's a fun, tried and true game. It's not the kind of thing that I will play for dozens and dozens of hours, but it may as well come bundled with every single Switch unit that gets sold. So Mario Maker 2 is sort of a hard game to review. I think that the original was one of the best games on the Wii U, and basically everything that can be said about that game can be said about its sequel. Not only are you getting a great sandbox editor and levels designed by Nintendo, but you have access to an infinite amount of user-created content, some of which is so creative it's astounding, honestly. And all the new features are great. The entire 3D world style and everything that comes with it is very cool. However, I will say this. When I asked myself if I would pay $60 to have these features added as DLC to the original game, I'd have to say no. Obviously, you're getting more than just those new items, but it's just not easy to recommend that people double dip. So I'll conclude by saying that if this is your first rodeo, so to speak, then you should absolutely get it. If you already own the first Mario Maker, have access to a working Wii U, and don't foresee that changing anytime in the near future, then use your best discretion.
Oh yeah, Mario time! If I sound sick, it's because I got sick on the second day of making this video. Right off the bat, Luigi's Mansion 3 is one of the best looking games in the Mario series, but I felt that I should mention that out of all the games I bought and played this year, this is the one that I've spent the least amount of time with because I've had it for the least amount of time. I only got it a few days ago and we're trying to play through it co-op, so that means, you know, my schedule has to sync up with Andrea's, and I just haven't gotten through much of the game, so it probably deserves to be higher on the list. I'm determining its placement based on a combination of my first impressions with the game and what I've come to expect from being a fan of the original Luigi's Mansion for like 18 years now. I'm not sure how I feel about the simplicity of the combat, but if my opinion changes, I'll probably make a standalone video about it at some time. But then again, I say things like that a lot and then never do, so we'll see.
Prior to playing Yoshi's Crafted World, Andrea and I played through Woolly World, which I thought was the best Yoshi game since Yoshi's Island. Is Crafted World better? It's hard to say. I found myself enjoying it more when I stopped trying to make direct comparisons. Beyond the obvious arts and crafts aesthetic, Crafted World does a fair amount to distinguish itself from the rest, being the first to allow movement along the Z-axis, and for the first time allowing us to play levels backwards for some added post-game content. But its greatest strength is definitely the level variety. We would go from piloting planes to safari shooting galleries, and I genuinely never knew what was coming next and always had something to look forward to. Coins are also put to pretty good use this time around, as you'll need them to collect costumes. Personally, I'm not so sure anything can beat Watermelon Yoshi or Cow Yoshi, but Crafted World's costumes are still pretty rad. If I have one complaint, it's that sometimes when you play co-op, the Yoshis can really get in each other's way. But with that being said, I can definitely recommend to anyone looking for a mostly mellow platformer, especially if you have one other friend you can share it with. I usually give myself about a minute to talk about each game, but I have to spend a bit longer on this one. Months before Pokemon Sword and Shield released, it was already mired in controversy, the biggest issue for most people being the whole national dex problem, and honestly this was never a big deal for me. For better or for worse, people have come to expect a lot more from Pokemon games. Gone are the days of it being enough to just have static 2D sprites that represent 151 Pokemon. Now the series has close to 1,000, and people expect them to all appear fully rendered in 3D and with complex animations. I usually prefer to play each new generation using a team that consists entirely of that region's Pokemon anyways, so it's not the end of the world for me. That said, if you want to have a conversation about reused assets and animations and other lazy shortcuts like that, I think that's a much more productive argument, because we should try to judge things based on what they are, not what they aren't, or what we had hoped that they would be. To be honest, I had a lot more fun with Sword and Shield than I was expecting to. But I will say this, it seems like it's always 2 steps forward and 1 step back with Game Freak. Pokemon fans have always wanted a console game with a big open world that we can explore freely with a free roaming camera, and the wild area is now the closest we've ever come to that vision, but at the same time, the rest of the game doesn't allow for that kind of freedom, as if they're not ready to take off the training wheels just yet. These little things like locked cameras and that buzz sound when you run into things are starting to make Pokemon feel archaic, as if it's adhering to hardware limitations that no longer exist. All of my complaining aside, that core Pokemon experience is still there, and it's just as fun and addictive as it's always been. Generation 8 doesn't really try to reinvent the wheel, instead you're getting a very streamlined and solid Pokemon game.
俺の両親の時と同じだな。あの人たちに何をした？
捧げていただけ。
If Majora's Mask, or the themes of Majora's Mask and the gameplay of A Link to the Past had a baby, a stylish JRPG baby, it would be Oninaki. This is the newest game from Tokyo RPG Factory, and I have to say it's been interesting to see how this team has changed since I Am Setsuna and Lost Sphere. In presentation alone, this is their most ambitious outing. The type of RPG that it evokes is a decidedly more modern one, and while it's considerably less menu heavy than their past games, there's still enough skill trees and customization to satiate that itch. Think of a competent Zelda game that emphasizes combat over puzzles. A Zelda game that cares more about interesting combat scenarios than dungeon gimmicks. The story is compelling, but could be convoluted for some people who don't play a lot of games like this. Genuinely, my biggest complaint is that the final boss was bullshit. So aggravating, but still a very great game. Also, it just occurred to me that at the beginning of this video, which I'm too lazy to edit, I said that all the games on this list are Switch exclusive. Oninaki would be an exception, but I still think that it's valid to include because it's not a port.
ずっと一緒にいられるのなら死さえ厭わない。私たちは笑顔で自らの命を絶った。
Real quick, let's do honorable mentions. Not like Cuphead honorable mentions, but like I didn't play them this year for one reason or another, so they don't make the list honorable mentions. Number 5, Link's Awakening. The idea that I would pay $60 for a remake of a game that I could get for like $5 on the 3DS is laughable, and so I didn't even touch it. It's actually not even one of my favorite Zelda games. I know it's a favorite of many people, but this is not a game that needed to be remade in any way, and I'm not particularly impressed with what they did with it, so I passed. Number 4, Untitled Goose Game. This game really made waves, didn't it? It's sort of an interesting premise. Seems cute and fun, but not like something that I would invest a lot of time into. Number 3, SteamWorld Quest Hand of Gilgamesh. The developers Image and Form had never made an RPG in their lives, but they took a Twitter poll or something rather and asked their fans what they would want to see from them, and people said make an RPG, and so they just did it. I really wanted to play this game just to honor their ambition and their willingness to please the people that actually play their games. I think that's awesome, and I want to see more of that from the industry. Indie devs should take a fucking chance once in a while instead of just doing whatever the focus group tested safe option is. Number 2, AI The Somnium Files. This is a mystery game that just seems batshit insane. There's a girl who's like the physical incarnation of an artificial eyeball, and I don't know, a polar bear stabs a child. It just seems really surreal, and Kozaki Yusuke did the art for it. And number 1, Wargroove. Clearly these guys are big fans of intelligent system strategy games like Fire Emblem and especially Advance Wars. Not only have they created a dope strategy game, but it also comes with a sort of sandbox mode for you to create your own campaign. I just wish this game had come out in like 2017 or 2018 when there was more of a need for good strategy games on the Switch. This game's biggest problem is that it came out the same year as an actual Fire Emblem game. Sorry, that sucks.
I believe that's why I'm here. So show me. Show me that the proper path lies before me!
It's become really cliche for reviewers like IGN to say that a game is good because it makes you feel like the protagonist, but in Daemon X Machina, it just straight up feels really good to do this. Maybe I'm not the one to ask, as I've never played Armored Core, but I feel like this is the definitive mech game. You're given a substantial level of control over both your character and your arsenal, complete with an absurd amount of weapons and customization so that you can tailor combat exactly to your preferences. But my favorite thing about Daemon X Machina is how the developers actually invited criticism and listened to our feedback after the prototype missions demo, then spent the next several months tweaking their game to make the best possible experience. They even released a long video highlighting these edits, from the simplest UI improvements to fundamental control changes. Compare this approach with how Pokemon was handled, where fan complaints were largely dismissed with corporate speech. I feel like Daemon X Machina is underrated and underrepresented on lists like this, so I'm happy to give it my endorsement.
All hope abandoned. Ye who enter here.
When comparing the combat in Astral Chain to that of Bayonetta, it at first appears slower and with less intuitive controls, but over the course of the game, I came to realize that Astral Chain's combat is less about button mashing and more about understanding your positioning and learning how to work in tandem with your Legion. I think it's a more purposeful fighting style and one that rewards more strategic thinking. Not only have I come to prefer Astral Chain's combat system, I also really enjoyed all the time I spent outside of combat. While Bayonetta levels often feel more or less like a linear pathway from fight to fight, Astral Chain often feels more open to exploration with more to discover, and less invisible walls impeding your progress. Some of my favorite moments were the chapters that begin with you investigating a crime scene and placing together clues and talking to different witnesses, something I never thought I would want from a Platinum Games game. I haven't played them all, but I would go as far as to say that Astral Chain is their most complete and well-rounded game yet, at least out of everything that's on a Nintendo console currently.
Don't expect a warm welcome when we get back.
Tell me, Nemesis, do you recall the Red Canyon? You'll die in it! Die! Die! You took everything that I loved!
This will come as a surprise to literally no one who knows me, but Fire Emblem Three Houses is easily my favorite game of the year. In 1 minute, I won't be able to touch on very much, but let me just say that it's not just being recognized because it belongs to one of my favorite series. It is what it does to go above and beyond expectations that makes it exceptional. Aside from the refined strategy that you can expect from an FE game, as well as the new gambits, teaching mechanics, and completely reworked class system that makes Three Houses among the most replayable games I've ever owned, the single most important thing about the game is just the sheer amount of content it holds. Some games can be beaten in under 10 hours. Three Houses has 4 separate campaigns, each of which can take 60 to 80 hours depending on how you play. Though it's only been out for less than half a year, it is my most played Switch game, and on my 4th playthrough I still haven't seen and heard everything. Also, this is one of the best localization efforts I've ever seen for a text-heavy RPG with 4 unique stories. It's all the more impressive that every line of dialogue is fully voice acted, from main characters to random NPCs. This is the standard for RPGs going forward as far as I'm concerned. Strategy RPGs aren't for everyone, but seeing as how it won Player's Voice, the only public and democratically selected category at this year's Game Awards, I think Three Houses will prove to be not only one of the best strategy games or RPGs to come to the Switch, but one of the best games in general.
Oh my. What could have brought you here?
I think that'll do it for now. Thank you for tolerating my monotone voice and listening to me ramble about nerdy things. I only spoke about my favorite game for about a minute, but if you're still not convinced, don't really understand the hype around it, feel free to supplement this video with either of the 40-minute videos uploaded by GameXplain. One is called How is Fire Emblem Three Houses Story So Good? The other is How is Fire Emblem Three Houses So Addictive? Highly recommended if you have, an hour and a half to kill. I say that somewhat facetiously. Don't actually watch those videos, they're very long. But yeah, cutting it off here. Don't know if I'm going to do this again next year, but I always say that and end up doing it, so we'll see.
I mean, in terms of hype, it's no Wonderful 101.